Welcome to the Psychedelic Paradigm Shift, where we explore the frontiers of psychedelic science. Journey with us as we interview leading experts, pioneering researchers, and courageous spiritual warriors whose lives have been transformed by the power of psychedelic medicine.
Hi, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jeannie Page, and I'm happy to have Floris Wolswijk here from the Netherlands. Thank you for joining us, Floris. I know it's late for you in the Netherlands. I'm really happy to have you here. I have so many things I want to ask you about. So, looking at your background, you are a consummate entrepreneur, is really how I would label you. You've got 2 degrees in psychology, both a bachelor's and a master's in organizational psychology, which I would imagine has lent well to being an entrepreneur. Is that correct? Knowing how to manage groups of people?
Yeah, I think this has helped a bit. And I think it's maybe more useful in terms of knowing a bit of the background or the basics around psychedelic research and being able to read papers and have a bit of that background. But of course, yeah, organizationally, that's also useful.
Yes. Okay. Well, I want to get into the real interesting stuff first. So I'm always curious, how did you first become interested in psychedelics? Was this something that happened in your younger years, or tell me the story?
Yeah, so one might guess that during psychological studies, you would hear something about psychedelic science, because it has been a large part of it even before the new renaissance that we're going through. But actually, I heard nothing about psychedelics. Maybe Jung was the closest we got to psychedelics. So I didn't hear about psychedelics. I wasn't a psychonaut at the time, but actually, relatively soon after graduating, I personally started using psychedelics, mostly recreationally. But I think in there I already saw the first signs of this being something that can expand your horizon and be a useful tool or useful technology to take another perspective and to broaden your horizon. And that really got me thinking about how can you use this to help other people. So how can we work under, and we'll talk about this, under the Dutch legal or unregulated framework and help people in a more coaching type framework. I'll blast off on sort of how things graduated from there. It's that I wanted to know about the science, learn more about the research. I had some experience building a website, building sort of an informational platform. So I leveraged that to make public my own learnings about the research, and that has blossomed into Blossom, where I keep track of the latest psychedelic research. And from there, my next question was, okay, this is interesting, and we can do this in a coaching framework here in the Netherlands, but how do we actually implement this into healthcare? And so mostly through Delphi, I've been working on that question to see how can we go from promising research results to actual implementation.
Yeah, okay. Well, so there's so many paths I want to follow here. So first, let's talk about your coaching business. So this FLO Coaching, you started this with your wife, is that correct?
Mhm.
Who had the inspiration? Was your wife also already into psychedelics, or what was the order of how this went?
No, so that all came from me, and actually I started it together with a friend who's now an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam. So we're both psychonauts, both doing psychedelics together, and from our conversations came the idea of seeing how can we help other people with this. My wife worked at the GP office, so doing something totally unrelated to psychedelics, but over the years she became more and more interested in this and also in this work aspect. I think really for her, she sees this as something that can help people get unstuck, for people to be able to take another perspective and get out of something that they couldn't without psychedelics. And it's not the whole treatment, right? There's a lot of coaching and preparation beforehand and a lot of integration. I may even say sort of the magic or the real effects happen during integration. But yeah, a psychedelic session really is something that can give people another perspective and get unstuck.
The integration piece is so important. I came to psychedelics therapeutically, so I didn't do any of the recreational thing. I feel like I missed that bandwagon 20 years, and I came to it through ayahuasca. And I was terrified because I'd never done it before. So I went into it with a very safe setting with medical doctors and medical background and psychiatrists and all of that. But from that, I really learned the importance of integration. And I've seen some people in this world who make the mistake of not integrating. And it's why I'm so passionate to really talk with people on the scientific side and the research side that really want to make this safe again, because we all saw what happened back in the 60s when, the hippie free love movement, it was everywhere, and peace, love, man, it was all great, but it kind of got out of control. And that is what caused the right wing backlash. At least it got out of control from their perspective, right? It was obviously, if people are finding peace and love and all this inner harmony, they're not going to want to support war, Vietnam War, and all that. So when I first learned through Michael Pollan's book, I'm sure you've read his book, How to Change Your Mind, the history of psychedelics. As a child of Gen X, I grew up in the 80s, always being told, just say no. I was so angry once I learned what had been actually done to shut it all down and how much science there had actually been that could have helped veterans of war. So many Vietnam vets that in my country were homeless on the street. We just grew up with that being normal. It makes me so angry now that they could have been helped. But also people with alcoholism. I know that the founder of the 12 Steps program, there was apparently a time where he wanted to incorporate psychedelics. The amount of people that could have been helped over the last 30 years because it was made, class one drug, it makes me so angry. So I think now that we are in this renaissance, it becomes that much more important for us to really focus on set and setting, being in a safe setting, which I want to share here about your business. This is you and your wife, right? This right here is your little sanctuary where you do your healing. That's fantastic. And I know Lotte, your wife, she's a therapist to begin with, right? She was an ACT therapist, is
Hmm.
that right? So she comes with a therapeutic background already. You guys are obviously taking very seriously the importance of set and setting and this beautiful, tranquil. I would love to come and do a journey there. That just looks so awesome. I want to ask you, so you guys have now, I believe, led close to 40 clients through journeys, somewhere in that range?
Hmm.
Do you see all walks of life? Who comes to you? Is it different ages of people? Is it friends of friends? How do people find you? What have you seen?
I would say it's a diverse group of people. In terms of age, I would say it's between maybe 25 and 65. It's men and women. It's, I would say, relatively higher education, but maybe that's also sort of from where our group or people that we are connected through indirectly that find us that come to this. Although, of course, in the research, you also see that this is maybe the audience for it. And people really come in with questions where they are at a turning point or they are maybe stuck in the past and want to be able to move forwards. And what we really want to be clear about, and what we also call it coaching, therapy itself is not a protected term, but we really want to call it coaching because that's the part where we focus on to really be more future oriented. So, how can you take those next steps? And maybe that does mean processing from the past, but really seeing, okay, how can you actually implement this in your life? And like you said, we use the acceptance and commitment therapy frameworks, which also really look at, yeah, and maybe empowerment is a word for it to see like, who am I? What are my values? I think that's a question that maybe a lot of people in the self-improvement space are familiar with and have done this a lot of times, but many normal average people haven't done this. And being able
Mhm.
to do that in the preparation to really explore that during the session itself and then to see, okay, how do I integrate this and how do I take steps for my values or take value aligned steps? I think that's an important true line in what we're doing.
I love that you mentioned average normal people haven't done this. That was me, right? I was one of these people that absolutely had a stigma against all of this. And I feel like my generation is unique because I did grow up with that war on drugs, at least in the US, that this was not something you ever touched. But I wish we had been honest that these substances, entheogens, have been used for millennia throughout indigenous cultures to help in healing ceremonies. And here in Seattle, psilocybin mushrooms grow all over the place. This is part of our natural ecosystem. So it's just crazy to me that it got put in the same category as heroin and cocaine and drugs that can kill you. And in a little bit, we're going to come talk about your other business, Blossom, which is doing such awesome aggregating of work. But I'll come back to that. So just how important it is for us to educate people right now on, as regular people, that this is something that everyone can do. Being in this world, I've been involved since 2018 when I did my first ayahuasca retreat. There seems that there's a lot of people that come to it the way you did, kind of recreationally, whereas I came to it 30 years later through a therapy standpoint. And I imagine you got all kinds of people coming to a different way. When I was doing the ayahuasca retreat, there was a Vietnam vet there There was a young guy that had been abused by his father and had been a cocaine addict as a result. There were just every kind of story you can imagine. And to be in the sharing circle after in this group of 10 strangers that had come together, all with different healing goals, and to see the transformations taking place over a week, it was just mind boggling. So I came back to the US reading Michael Pollan's book on the plane, and I thought, okay, it's time. This is definitely a paradigm shift. And I came out of the psychedelic closet, so we say. I was not met with very positive feedback. I'm curious for you, what has been the reaction of your friends and family as you've really taken the plunge into this world?
I guess linking it back to my values, I've always been entrepreneurial and sort of making my own way and having that sort of be important for me. So in that way, it wasn't surprising for people that I did something that's different from normal. Like after graduating, I started a complete food business, which was selling bags. This is gonna sound weird, but bags of powder, which is food. But that's not like a normal food, right? It's more like a fitness shake or it's a weight loss shake. So that's sort of what maybe people associate with it. And that has become more normal over the years that people have a shake as a meal, but it wasn't the case 11 years ago. So I've always been able or, yeah, not bothered by what other people think. Then on psychedelics specifically, I think in the Netherlands, people are maybe more open to this than in the US. It's more normalized, there's less stigma around it. So think in terms of our politics and our culture that is available or that isn't looked down upon too much. For say we call them coffee shops where you can buy cannabis. You can see a elderly woman walk in and not be ashamed that she's buying something because it's just buying from a normal shop. So in that way, I think that stigma isn't there. This week we'll have the Amsterdam Dance event. There might be posters there that say this MDMA batch is contaminated. Please be safe out there. Everyone in terms of the police organized, everyone knows people are doing different drugs there, but it's really about safe consumption and not per se trying to penalize the end consumer.
Yeah, it is interesting to look at the dichotomy between the US view and what you have in the Netherlands. I was in Amsterdam in my 20s, backpacking around after living in Europe, and I knew about the pot brownies and all that, but even then I was like a straight-laced kid who didn't do any of that. And I wish I had. Looking back, I'm like, I would have had so much more fun. But now that I'm in Seattle, where we've had cannabis for, geez, 25 years, like we, along with Colorado, were one of the first. But being in a place where it's so normal, like you said, I see elderly people, it's literally everybody, right? And it always cracks me up walking into the pot shop because it's like, okay, these are people that are recognizing that there are natural ways to help them relax or take care of their anxiety rather than take a pharmaceutical drug. And it's such a peaceful, welcoming environment. So I think it's interesting that you guys have had that culture for so long. And I know that psychedelic retreats are legal there, right? That's kind of when I first started looking, like, where are the places? I did it in Peru. I'm like, all right, the Netherlands, that's a place this is legal. So I made the assumption that you guys were fairly progressive and on this stuff. And what you educated me the first time we spoke, that psilocybin, the mushrooms themselves used to be legal, but now they're not, but the truffles are legal. And I find that so strange. It's like, okay, how is that any different? Or is it just because they can control it better in terms of the consumption and the taxation? What do you know?
No, so the history there does show sort of the Dutch politics. It's that there was an international incident with a tourist, and maybe there were others before, where someone was also taking mushrooms and there was sort of a big uproar. And then at that time, I think 2008, maybe 2006, other countries weren't doing anything in terms of legalization. So the Dutch, say, politics needed to take a decision to do something to appease the international community. So then mushrooms were banned, but they kept a loophole in there, which at least some people say that was on purpose to keep truffles still legal. So I think that's sort of trying to keep all the different parties happy. But yeah, the Netherlands, it is progressive here in a lot of ways. But also maybe because of that, we don't have a large incentive to make changes or to really sort of take that next step. And that's
Right.
what you've seen, say, with cannabis, that it's legal, it's fully there when it's in a coffee shop. But how does it get there? How is it being produced? Then we're looking the other way or rounding up the producers. There are now small experiments on doing legalized growing, etc. But Germany has, so we're like, what? So we're not improving or seeing next steps. So even with psilocybin now, that they will have compassionate use access in Germany, and that may be just 20, 50 people per year, but that's a first step and a step where there's a lot of data collection. Here in the coaching framework, there's now a Guild of Guides, sort of a industry group, but that is a loose affiliation. There's no structure, no data, and there are some standards, but it's from that compassionate use program, you'll be able to learn so much more. That's maybe compared to a clinical study in terms of what we can learn there. In the Czech Republic, they'll have access to psilocybin therapy next year. And in that way, we're sort of falling behind a bit. So who knows, we'll be able to catch up. There is an ear from the government, and there are committees, there are reports, but there's no big action yet.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that about the Czech Republic. It was interesting when I saw that coming January 26th. It's such a weird time to be in the US right now for obviously many reasons, but we are so conservative compared to Europe on so many things. When I was living in Europe, I think I learned about more progressive drug policy through Portugal. Portugal had the most progressive, legalize everything, make it safe, make it regulated. And to be here where we're so puritanical in so many ways. I mean, this is the country where, Janet Jackson lost the top of her thing and it's like a huge scandal, right? It's just such a different cultural basis here. But at the same time, that's why it's so fascinating that we're having this revolution here in the US, because it is actually the Republicans that are on board through the veterans movement with psychedelic medicine. And I feel like I'm living in the upside down in so many ways. But I find that when I see Republican congressmen that were super conservative on social values going before their legislators talking about the need to study psilocybin, I think particularly in Texas, which is a very conservative state. Texas legislator is wanting to study this for the veterans. So that's fantastic, right? Because my country has a history of going to war, as we all know. And I think, I was looping back to the people that you've helped through journeys, I was going to ask you, have you worked with any veterans? You probably don't have the population of veterans in the Netherlands that we have here. This is, I think, a uniquely, sadly American thing.
We haven't worked with veterans in our practice. I do know that one group in the Netherlands is explicitly working with veterans, and the leader there, he's also a veteran. So I know it is happening, and that is, I think, a place where psychedelics can offer a lot of help. But I think, it's definitely on a smaller scale than for the US.
Yeah, I think here it is going to be what allows us to drive the conversation, because that incident that you had with the foreign tourist that changed everything. I fear those things happening. You hear things in the news once in a while of somebody being on mushrooms and being at a concert and doing something bad. And I think, no, don't do that. Like set and setting. You got to be in a safe setting. And I think we really have to drive that home. And with it becoming so well accepted in a therapeutic space. Now, of course, Oregon and Colorado are both offering it therapeutically, and they're not going to be the last. We've had so many different cities that have decriminalized. Seattle decriminalized in 2021, DC decriminalized, I think Ann Arbor, so many others. And they're mostly progressive states. But that's why I look at Texas as this really interesting example of the veterans are that going to be that bridge to the conservatives. And honestly, if so many of these people that don't understand these substances, if they would just open their mind to them, they would, of course, understand. And I think this is one of my frustrations with family and friends that, they think I'm down this rabbit hole. I'm Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole, and they don't realize how much healing it has actually brought to me. And that's really my main mission with this podcast, is I really want to bring everyone together who's part of this conversation. I mean, you're on the research and the coaching side, and we'll come back to your research project in a minute, but just so many amazing scientists out there doing so much work at the Imperial College of London and Johns Hopkins. It's just, wow. When I first came out of the closet, I presented that I'm a rational person. I'm a professional. I'm not some crazy hippie. I tried to present this in this manner to my family, that here's a bunch of studies from Johns Hopkins and Harvard, thinking that would get me taken seriously. And there's so much stigma in this country. And I think that's where you guys have the advantage in Europe. I think people are more open-minded about drug policy in general. And I know Australia was the first to federally reclassify MDMA. We've come really close here in the US with MDMA. We had that trial last year that almost made it to phase 2. It's coming, right? And MAPS in Santa Cruz is definitely doing amazing work over decades. But it is absolutely a renaissance is happening. And my prayer is that we can keep it moving forward and not have another one of these incidents that just causes, because right now we've got so much fascism rising everywhere and just this inclination for the power systems to want to control and oppress and thwart our free speech. That's happening on one hand, this is happening on the other. It's like, whoa. So where do we go from here? So actually, this is a good time for me to pull up your other business, Blossom. And I gotta say, Floris, I was so impressed when I started digging through here. This is like a one-stop shop for everything anyone wants to know about anything to do with psychedelics. You've obviously done a ton of work. How long have you been working on this? Since 2019?
Yeah, that's been my passion projects over the last few years.
I get it. I mean, what's fabulous about this? So I am someone who has suffered with depression. So I can go here, click on reports, get all these different topics. First of all, you did an amazing job laying it all out. But you've got this whole report that one can buy and then different things to click to. So, explaining treatments. This is amazing. You can also go here to insights and find top 10 papers. So I'm going to be like, just talk about being down a rabbit hole. I'm going to be spending a lot of time on your site, and I want everyone to come to this because this is amazing work. I know it's got membership options. So who are you working with? You're working with different organizations on this. What players in the world have come to you to get your reports?
So a lot of different audiences that come to Blood for keeping up to date with the research. It's the one hand, it's the researchers themselves wanting to know about what's the latest. And when I started in 2019, I had a monthly newsletter of both the research and sort of businessy stuff that was happening. And I could fit it all into one email. And now it's at the moment like a bi-weekly email on just the research. And then instead of just maybe a few papers being published every month, it's now about 150 to 200 research papers in total that are being published. I've become more and more strict on what I keep track of. So I add about 10-ish papers to the database who are talking about new clinical results. For instance, I'm not adding the 100th review that's being put out there. So I've become a bit more selective there. And in terms of collaborations, I've worked together with different groups on sometimes on project basis, sometimes on ongoing basis. For instance, now I'm working together with the Mind Foundation to do an overview of the research for their audience. That's a German nonprofit, but work together with Brain Futures on their large report on psychedelic research. So there's different groups that I've worked with in the past.
And have you gotten any good press yet with this?
There's been some things here and there, but the first thing that pops in my mind that somewhere was on the US national news that a researcher was talking about Blossom. Like, oh, here I can find the latest research. Guess I have that one in the pocket.
Well, it'll be my goal to help you get this out there further and wider because it is phenomenal research. So well done, you. But you obviously are someone who has your hands in many pots, right? So you're doing your coaching and your training. You're also doing this, which must take a ton of time. And then you're also working for Delphi, a US-based consultancy in Boulder. So tell me about what they do.
So we have from going to the research and wanting to know about how do we actually implement this? How do we make this happen? I got to talking with Leah Mix, who's the founder of Delphi, and she has a long healthcare background. So she's been first as a practitioner, a licensed family and marriage therapist, and then working on the US healthcare system, trying to introduce a new behavioral health treatment, and then over the last decade working in psychedelics. And well, at Delphi, we really try to see both how can we help existing partners within the psychedelic ecosystem, but also help connect them with the broader world, with the US government, with finance, and with the healthcare system. So seeing how do we bring those different pieces together and how do we step out of our bubble or how do we expand it and really make this become a treatment that is available. And then, for instance, then in the coming week, Leah will be at the Real Mental Health Summit, which is sort of a place where finance meets mental health. I think that's their slogan, to help present and talk about how psychedelics can be their bridge. But that is for an audience that isn't psychedelic native. That's from the finance side. So really trying to see how can we introduce this to other stakeholders and interface with people outside of our bubble, because if we just stay within our bubble and don't try to change those ideas from 40, 50 years ago in the stakeholders that have the power at the moment, I think we're doing a disservice to the movement.
Yeah. So are you working with legislatures? You're the European lead, right? So it's mostly Americans and then there's you in Europe. So are you tasked with working with legislatures across Europe, or are you working with healthcare companies, or both?
Yeah, so for Europe specifically, we recently wrote a large, or kind of the first report on psychedelics and reimbursement. So really mapping out what needs to be done, what are all the steps, how do you go from positive phase 2 results to actually this becoming available? What do you need in terms of billing codes, therapist training, health technology assessments? Are we looking at, is this something that is cost effective, and how is it done in different countries? So there's a lot of steps. I think we're at 200, maybe 300, including appendices of pages of text on this. And there we're taking the next step on moving forward to seeing, okay, what are the different models of how this can be implemented, and what do we need to do to actually make that happen. First, the report at the beginning of this year, and now taking the next step on actually implementing this. And that can be mapping out what is there already and seeing, okay, how can countries in Europe learn from this, or also outside of it. So for instance, from the Czech model, or learning from the Swiss model, which has been around in the 90s, and then again from 2014 onwards. So seeing, okay, what are the different avenues, what are the different routes. And I think that's maybe one of the key things that I want to get across for Europe, is that we're not passively waiting for a drug developer to be successful in the US and have everything exported, have everything done, which maybe happens in a few years, and then wait for them to come to Europe, but see, okay, what are proactive steps that we can take either to make their path easier towards Europe, or see what are other paths like the compassionate use access in Germany, or
Right.
learning from the Swiss model to see, okay, how do we make this accessible in a reimbursed way. So I'm really specifically looking at how can this become part of healthcare, because there is this coaching model and we can also still learn from that, but that's something that is available to the few, to the people who have the means to do this, the people who are open to doing this. And I want to see this become something that's available for all who can benefit from it, but that their GP can recommend to them versus them meeting someone who's doing psychedelics.
Right. It has such the potential to disrupt everything. And I think this is what's fascinating and exciting and scary about it at the same time, that if we get to the point where we can offer this through healthcare plans, and let's say somebody with depression can get long-term relief from 3 sessions of psilocybin versus a lifetime of SSRIs, that's obviously a threat to those pharmaceutical companies. But on the same hand, there's all these pharmaceutical companies now that are pursuing this, which I've been paying close attention to. So it's going to be interesting to see which way it goes. And I know a lot of them have been following the cannabis model as well. And how did that not work? What was good about the cannabis model and what was bad about it? And there's all kinds of nuances to that as well. And as we watch Oregon and Colorado create the therapeutic model, the question, one of the biggest debates I'm seeing in the world is, if we allow this to be something that is pharmaceutically driven by the for-profit pharmaceutical industry, does that then cannibalize the more holistic shamanic approach to doing shamanic journeys with a natural sacrament? And I think for me, I think there has to be both paths. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, how the two sit together.
Yeah, I think that's true, that both of the paths are possible, and that's making it available to different people who have different needs. And then even just on that coaching versus therapy distinction, I think that you won't get reimbursed for to get psychedelic therapy for feeling a bit stuck in your life, or not knowing where you are, or burnout is sort of maybe also in between those areas. But I don't expect burnout, which I think is a common thing people come to us for, is something that you'll get psychedelic therapy reimbursed for anytime soon. I think it will start with treatment resistant depression,
Yep.
people with PTSD that has been going on for a long time, people with very challenging problems where I think psychedelics can be helpful, but not per se with enriching your life, or like even not even saying that there are problems, but even trying to expand your horizon and seeing this as a tool that can be useful and having guidance there that can be amazing. So I think on all those sides that won't go into the medical system. And I'm all for this becoming available for people in those situations. And then on the medical side, I think that will give the most broad access if implemented right. And then the pharma companies who are pursuing this, I think some of them have been really explicit about not supporting the legalization or this becoming more widely available. And the one that sometimes it's coming from maybe less positive views on if this becomes available and people are doing this. But it could also come from them just really staying in their own lane and saying, okay, this is what we're focusing on and we're developing a medicine versus the recreational side of things. So I think there's two lenses to look at that.
When you think about pharmacology in general, so many pharmaceuticals have been derived from something in the natural world, right? We don't really think about that people producing drugs have gone out and found different things in nature and then brought them back into the lab to compound them in different ways. I've heard friends here that are against the pharmacology aspect of it because they want it to stay sacred, they want it to be something ceremonial. And I understand that, but my issue with that is the people that are very resistant to this type of work, unless they're being recommended to do this by a psychiatrist, they're never going to do it. I could tell them till I'm
Hmm.
blue in the face that this will transform their lives and heal anything they didn't even know they needed to heal. But they're blah, blah, blah. I'm just talking. Somebody has to already be inherently open to that sort of thing. And I think for me, because I have a history I was a Spanish major, I've traveled around Latin America. So I've learned about the shamanic culture. It was just kind of an organic journey for me to be in Peru for a yoga retreat. And then I learned about this thing called ayahuasca that I'd never heard of. Whereas my family, they're so Western science focused. So I think that avenue is got to be there for those people. And I want all the people that suffer from depression that aren't open to these ways that I've done it, I still want them to get the same relief. So if they can get that from some compounded version of psilocybin that's made in a lab, great. Maybe they don't get the psychotropic effects with it, and they'll be curious to see how that all plays out because I think the shamanic journey, that's the whole part of the process of healing is going on the journey that it takes you on. So if that piece is removed, I don't know how it would work, but it'll be interesting to see what comes with all the trials and which countries get to it first. Obviously, from the profit standpoint, the pharmaceutical companies have that motive to be driven by it. And I know there's a couple in the UK and one here, and just they're all speeding to get this FDA approval. Other countries will probably do it before we do. But I think right now, like everything I've been reading, the US is one of the leaders of this renaissance, which I just find, again, wholly ironic considering where we came from. And if anyone watching hasn't read Michael Pollan's book, please do, How to Change Your Mind. But also, I don't know, Floris, if you've seen the Netflix series that they made based on the book. It's a really good
Hmm.
introduction for people that are new to this world, I think, that maybe do have a stigma, because Michael Pollan was just a regular straight-laced journalist guy that had never, like me, had never touched this stuff. And for him to write about it, he's like, all right, well, I have to clearly experience this in order to write about it. And it obviously changed his life. And, me on the West Coast, surrounded by the tech world, the whole Bay Area, Silicon Valley has been microdosing for decades, right? So everyone in that world kind of knows that. But it's like so much of the creativity that has come, like the Apple computer, right? Steve Jobs apparently was using psychedelics, just helps us to channel so much mastery and magic and just open up your world in so many ways. I have friends that I consider straight laced that haven't done this stuff. They look at me and they think, well, geez, Jeannie's doing this stuff. So people start to ask questions. One of my friends just asked me the other day, what's involved? How does this work? And if you're someone who's never come to it, it can be scary. I was terrified the first time I ever did it because I didn't know, was I going to lose my mind? Was I going to have some repressed memory, of some horrible trauma as a kid? All that was very scary. And I had grounding practices of meditation and pranayama that helped me. But once I did it, I realized, oh my God, it's so not scary. And I know there's such a thing as a bad trip, but I don't even like that terminology because my impression of that is that that's somebody facing stuff they have to heal. And it's how you integrate it and work with it that makes it whether productive or not. I mean, you tell me you've guided many more people. What is the biggest challenge that you see in guiding people?
I think there's preconception of losing your mind or sort of being afraid of that. I think that that's very common and something you can talk about and say, okay, this is what's going to happen. These are some things that might happen. So really be clear about that at the start. And yeah, I think that there can be bad trips or challenging trips, but if, at least from my perspective, if someone's relatively healthy, if they're in a controlled environment, there's a sitter there, I would expect, and you also see in the research, that there aren't many bad trips, so to say, like bad trips that are different from if someone's at a festival and has never done something and their friends give them something and they're
Right.
losing their mind and they're lost. That's something so different from being in a controlled setting with a
Agree.
sitter there. So in that way, I wouldn't say bad trips as such are there. Of course, it can be challenging in terms of what comes up and how that's being processed. And some people are shaking, so if their body starts moving, and then I think it's really the role of the guide to comfort them or to say just to let them go through that and not maybe not repress it, or if they say, okay, I want to take a bit of a breather to sit up and look around, like then you're less into the trip. We do of course try to people to lay down music, etc. But so there are some ways to sort of help people through that, but I wouldn't say it's a bad trip as in the person who's lost at the festival.
Right. And Paul Stamets talks about this a lot, the famous mycologist, how he's all about people using it in a safe setting and not really using it recreationally. And I'm glad if people find it that way, because, obviously even people that have found it recreationally, like you, has led to this other path. And they've obviously gotten some kind of insight out of it. I do think in general, if you are someone who's using it recreationally, I think it's really important to have a grounding practice. For me, I do yoga, meditation, even just walking in the grass. I think it's so important to stay rooted in this reality as well. We can live in both worlds, but do you have any thoughts about that? Just about staying grounded or how to integrate after the fact?
The first thing that comes to mind is just having the time, not squeezing in it between different work things or not having the time to process or to take action on the lessons learned. And you don't always need to, like in a recreational setting, you don't always need to learn something from it or to take something with you. But if there's something does come up and you don't have the time to process it or to actually take action on that, that's a shame.
Yeah. Well, so what gives you the most hope about where we are right now in this paradigm shift?
I think it is different from the 60s, 70s in terms of how it's being done. You talked about that set and setting at that time, but it wasn't uncommon for people to dose with 200 to 400 micrograms of LSD, which is sort of a heroic dose. And now maybe people do 100, and sometimes like experienced people do 200. So I think that's a big difference. And the whole terms of set and setting were maybe invented then, but now are being applied, and people are more considerate about it. So I think in that way that's hopeful, and you see this becoming part of culture and not per se just the counterculture. So in that way, I think that is very positive. And then seeing bipartisan support for psychedelics and this being an issue that yeah people from different perspectives can support. I think that that's the hopeful message. And then I guess on the pharma side, so we've been to a boom and bust cycle where maybe in 2018, 19, people were going like, this is the next thing and it's going to happen in 2 years. And we're now at a more realistic level. Like it's going to take some time and it's going to go through the normal process. It's going to need the normal evaluation. There's a large setback with MAPS or Lycos or now resilience with MDMA. And so hopefully something can come up again there. But I think, yeah, there's so much energy for this and so much momentum that I do know things will happen. What will happen exactly when? I think that's the question we can't answer yet.
Yeah, the reason why I named this podcast the psychedelic paradigm shift is because to me it's obvious that we are in it, like smack in the middle of it. This renaissance has been, in my estimation, already happening for 15 to 20 years. And it's just been quiet. I don't know what it's been like in the media atmosphere where you live, but here in the US, over the last 3, 4 years, I've seen it on 60 Minutes. I've seen Anderson Cooper talking about it, CNN, just regular media channels are talking about it, and mostly with the perspective of treatment resistant depression or PTSD. The veterans, for sure. I've seen a front page spread on the New York Times of a veteran that came to this work and went to Mexico to do it where they could do it legally. So it's out there. And every time I see these articles, I share them on my social media as another attempt to like, look, guys, it's legit. This is legit science. It's being studied at all these legit places. And the stigma is still there. And I think I'm just frustrated by my generation. I think the younger generations, younger than me, are more aware that this is a viable thing. And when I see all the different conferences happening and I see mainstream psychiatrists going to these conferences, that's how I know this shift is already happening. I think we're only a few years away, with Oregon and Colorado being the models here, of how this is going to roll out. We're going to see similar with cannabis, like what worked, what didn't. Okay, how do we tweak it? Oregon has two models. It has the legalization route to use it personally, but also the therapeutic route. So, and here in Washington, we've decriminalized it here in Seattle, but we're trying to do that on a state level. It'll be so fascinating to see where it goes. And I know I'm going to be digging into all of your reports. It's such an amazing site. And I'm going to put links below to all of your websites, and just that database is just breathtaking, Floris. I hope you feel good about it, because honestly, it's obviously a passion project and it's going to make a difference for sure. Well, I don't have any other questions for you. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm really happy to have you, and I look forward to seeing what you do in the future, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And I look forward to hearing what you're up to next and what are the next topics that you're discussing. So I'll keep looking out for new podcasts after this.
All right, take care.